I pulled her up by her bootstraps and I said, look, nobody in the West expects you to survive 5 minutes in this war. If Ukraine is to have a prosperous and proud future, you will remember this chapter in your history. You fought for your freedom. You fought for your independence. And that will be a very proud chapter. It's horrible. War is always horrible, but never give up hope.
The Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has praised Donald Trump's determination to end the war in Ukraine. The US president said accepting new borders, though, was necessary to reach a ceasefire. But the Ukrainian leader warned a renewed Russian offensive could then ensue. The White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, has just given a press conference in the last hour and said a trilateral meeting, so that would be between President Trump, President Zelensky and President Putin, could be on the cards.
He hopes in the future there can be a trilateral meeting with these three leaders to finally bring this conflict to an end. But this administration has really used every lever, has taken every measure to achieve peace through a diplomatic solution. And I think the President of the United States getting in the room with the President of Russia, sitting face to face rather than speaking over the telephone, will give this president the best indication of how to end this war and where this is headed.
Well, in the studio with me, the military analyst Sean Bell, the Air Vice-Marshal in the RAF. Sean, thank you very much for your time.
Good evening, Rosie.
Peace through diplomacy. How possible is that? And is Friday a very small first step?
Ultimately, the war will end out in Ukraine. The challenge is when and what are the circumstances of that? At the moment, Russia is on the front foot. It's making advances. We've heard literally in the last 24 hours talk about 10 kilometres, which is a huge amount of land being taken. And ultimately, history suggests that Russia will only stop when either it's achieved its objectives, and we could speculate about what they are, or it's forced to stop. And forcing it is either military or economic. And at the moment, it doesn't look like any Western nation's got any appetite for getting involved militarily. And therefore, there was an expectation that maybe Donald Trump would actually impose some really big tariffs because he's made very clear when he came into power, I'm going to end this war in 24 hours. Then it was going to be 100 days. It still hasn't stopped. He then said there was going to be 60 days or 50 days. He's going to impose these tariffs. Then it became 10 to 12 days. We passed that deadline on Friday, and it's not entirely clear to me, therefore, what is this meeting seeking to achieve?
Donald Trump says within 2 minutes, that's what he said yesterday, and today Caroline Leavitt has reiterated that when they're face to face, Donald Trump will be able to work out how he can end this conflict. I mean, they're sort of suggesting Donald Trump has interpersonal skills that he'll be able to read the room in a way he hasn't been able to over the phone and then come up with a solution. I mean, we're sort of laughing. It is laughable.
It is. And unfortunately, there's a grave risk here that President Trump, the most powerful president in the world, actually comes away from this looking rather stupid. However, on the positive side, there will have to be a diplomatic solution eventually. And at the moment, President Zelensky will not want to compromise. He's been involved in a 3-year war. I've been out to Ukraine several times, and it's heartbreaking to see what they're going through. And nobody's going to be able to dictate to Ukraine what to do. But ultimately, it will end. The challenge, of course, is working out how do you force Russia to come to the table when it is on the front foot. And I think at the moment, what Donald Trump's probably trying to do is just sound out Putin to find out where the areas of compromise might be. The trouble is we're speculating wildly around that, and that creates some really interesting headlines, which I don't suspect is going to help the cause at all.
Compromise means concessions. Where do you think they might be on Ukraine's side?
Well, you're into dangerous ground here, but as a student of history, so Crimea and the port of Sevastopol was very important to the former Soviet Union. They'd lost hundreds of thousands of lives securing it. When the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia and Ukraine almost went to war about Crimea because they weren't about to give up their sort of warm water port. Then you look and see the gradual march of NATO towards Russia, and Russia therefore claims that that's dangerous to them. And we may laugh that off, but luckily you're not old enough, but I'm just about old enough to remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, which resulted because Soviet missiles were launched right on the American border. It upset America at the time, so we've got to be very careful we criticise Russia for NATO weapons potentially being on their border. That's not an excuse for invasion, but it does mean how do you reassure Russia that this won't happen again, but also how do you post-conflict protect the rest of Ukraine from simply Russia taking a pause, rearming and going for a second bite.
You say the rest of Ukraine. How likely is it that a lot of that territory that Ukraine's lost will be permanently lost to Russia?
As a military guy, it's very difficult to see how Ukraine will get that territory back. I have to say, when I was in Ukraine for the first time, there was this sense of resilience around the people. We're going to get rid of the Russians out of here. It's just a matter of time. Last time I was there a couple of months ago, there was this sense of war weariness and actually almost a sense of we just need the war to end. They've made an immense sacrifice in lives. There's a little corner in the corner of the capital, Kyiv, Maidan Square, where the little flags are fluttering, one flag for a life. And I have to say, every time I go there, I spend 20 minutes there because it's incredibly moving. Hundreds of thousands of these flags. There is a huge price that's being paid. So bluntly, the answer is Russia has slowed on the battlefields. The drone warfare is killing a lot of people on the front line. It's stopping the Russians making much of an advance. But it's very difficult to see that Ukraine would ever be able to push them out. I think the real issue here is, notwithstanding that captures our attention as the front of house, the real issue is how do you protect the rest of Ukraine and provide them with a guarantee of sovereignty? It wasn't that long ago, Budapest Memo of 1994, that said, we'll guarantee, give up your nuclear weapons, Ukraine, and we will guarantee the security. Within 20 years, Russia had ripped up that bit of paper. Russia will come again. Therefore, how do you protect the rest of Ukraine? That's the question Zelensky will need answering.
It's also one of the questions that Downing Street are asking. They say, look, any sort of pause in the fighting can't just be used as a chance for Russia to rearm. So we've got that potential problem. But the second one is the one you just suggest, Sean, that how do we trust that any agreement that they could come to, and that still is quite a long way off. We've got talks on Friday. That is a very much a tentative step. That Russia can be trusted to stick to any side of the deal that they agreed to.
So the blunt answer question is you can't trust Russia. I mean that in the broadest possible sense, that you have to plan for the worst, hope for the best. So you have to put in place steps to make sure that Russia can't do this again. Now, to look very bluntly, if you remember all the way back to the start of the war, back in February 22, Russia probably expected to walk into Ukraine and take it in a matter of days. Remember that 40-mile convoy and the like. Now, it was only because of Ukrainian resilience, courage and sacrifice that they were able to hold the Russians out and then push them back. But we've ended up, I think it's 19% now of Ukraine is now occupied by Russia. The question is, it looks very difficult for Ukraine to push them out again. I do think there is a way that the West can help ensure Ukraine, the rest of Ukraine's sovereignty. And I think my final word on this would be that when I was out there, I was interviewed by one of the Ukrainian journalists, and at the end of it, they talked a bit about this, and at the end of it, she almost burst into tears, off air. And I looked at her and said, what's up? And she said, well, if we end up ceding territory, what's the war been for? What have all these sacrifices been for? And I pulled her up by her bootstraps and I said, look, nobody in the West expects you to survive 5 minutes in this war. If Ukraine is to have a prosperous and proud future, you will remember this chapter in your history. You fought for your freedom. You fought for your independence. And that will be a very proud chapter. It's horrible. War is always horrible, but never give up hope. And Ukraine is a very proud people. The challenge is, how do you guarantee that security going forward?
Yeah, and how do they now wrestle the sort of diplomatic choreography that is needed at the same time, particularly in light of what has been at times some very tense relations between President Zelensky and President Trump? Where do the EU countries factor into this? There had been talks, the coalition of the willing, we're part of them, of some sort of European peacekeeping force. Sort of chatter around that seems to have quietened down as of late. Can you imagine that that will be part of some kind of peace agreement, that we have European troops there to help defend Ukraine?
Yeah, this is a difficult one, isn't it? I wouldn't want to get dragged into specifics. I think the reason it's fallen off the perch is very few European nations were prepared to offer troops into that. I mean, and if you look specifically, I have several Polish friends and they were not prepared to put Polish soldiers in. Why is that? Because actually Poland is the next country under threat.
They're busy looking after themselves.
Exactly right. So they're not going to put any people into it. And there's lots of other countries that will be a bit nervous about putting forces into that. I do think as a former airman, one of the things I think is an easy step to do is to set up a no-fly zone. One of the reasons that the Ukraine's now F-16s, they don't have much to back it up. They're losing a lot of them. I think they've lost 3 so far of the ones that are being gifted, and the pilots, crucially. But if the West was to put a no-fly zone, it limits the risks to the West. It will be a very powerful statement. And Russia is not capable of going quickly. It needs to recover anyway. So I do think there are ways to reassure Ukrainians and help along the way.
What would be a win for Trump on Friday?
Oh, now that's an awkward question. My worry is I look through the other lens is I think President Putin feels everything is going his way at the moment. He was a minor country. He was seeing NATO march towards him. In the last 3 years, he's watched America look more isolationist away from NATO. He's watched the rest of European NATO leaders start to worry and get all fearful and look fractured. He's looking very powerful now. He's on the front foot. He's used nuclear rhetoric to keep everybody at bay. And I think he will be feeling emboldened. In fact, my worry is that so will China, so will Iran, so will North Korea. And therefore, that creates a very different complex around the world. So I think Donald Trump at the moment, I do not see he's got a magic wand here. Eventually, he does have the tools to stop this. He's got the military might to stop it, and he's got the economic levers to stop it. Whether he actually wants to do it is another matter.
And if he's got the confidence too as well. Sean, thank you so much. As ever, it's been completely brilliant to have your analysis. The military analyst, Sean Bell, in the studio with me. Thank you so much.